The courtroom was packed, every seat occupied, murmurs echoing off the high ceilings as the morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras trained on the front where a police K-9 unit stood with silent authority. The dog, a massive German shepherd named Rex, exuded discipline and control. His handler, Officer Daniels, towered beside him, his hands gripping the leash but his posture casual, relaxed, as if the dog were an extension of his own body. The murmurs quieted as the judge called the court to order, gavel banging sharply against the wooden desk. No one could have predicted that the tension in the room would skyrocket, not because of the case itself, but because of a small, determined child who clutched her mother's hand and took slow, cautious steps forward. Avery Carter, only 3 years old, walked into the courtroom wearing her favorite pink coat, the one with tiny embroidered flowers. Her curly hair bounced as she moved, and her wide brown eyes scanned the room with a mixture of fear and unexplainable determination. She didn't run or hide. She didn't cling nervously to her mother. Instead, she walked as if she knew exactly what she had to do. The entire courtroom seemed to pause. Lawyers froze mid-sentence, reporters held their pens in midair, and even the judge leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. No one had ever seen Avery in court before. She was a toddler, and toddlers didn't belong in such serious places. And yet, here she was, making a beeline for the massive dog at the front. Rex's ears twitched the moment he saw her. His brown eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, softened. He tilted his head, a quiet whine escaping his throat that drew every eye in the room. Officer Daniels instinctively tightened his grip on the leash, a faint frown crossing his face. "Rex, stay," he commanded, but there was something in the way the dog was looking at Avery that suggested obedience might be optional. The dog's stance shifted subtly. His tail lowered, his body relaxed, and his gaze never left the small girl approaching. The judge, a stern man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses, slammed his gavel again. "Order," he barked, but even his voice seemed to fade into the hum of anticipation that filled the air. Avery, however, didn't slow. She released her mother's hand with surprising confidence, each step deliberate. The pink of her coat contrasted sharply with the dark mahogany of the courtroom benches and the black leather of the attorney's shoes. Every movement she made seemed impossible to ignore. Whispers rippled through the spectators. "Who is that?" someone muttered. "Is she going to the dog?" The tension was electric. Officer Daniels shifted uneasily. He had trained Rex to respond to commands, not to toddlers wandering unaccompanied through a courtroom. And yet the dog made no move to stop her, no growl, no defensive stance, nothing but that unwavering gaze, filled with an intensity that seemed almost human. Avery finally reached Rex and placed a small hand on his thick, black and tan fur. For a moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. The dog shivered, a low, soft whine escaping him, and Avery looked up at him with eyes wide but calm, unafraid. The tension escalated as she leaned closer, almost as if she were speaking in a language no one else could hear. "Hi, buddy," she whispered, just 2 words. Simple, innocent, yet charged with meaning beyond anyone's comprehension. The effect was immediate and shocking. Rex's body stiffened, then melted against her hand. He pressed his massive head against her small frame, his tail wagging slowly but with unmistakable emotion. Gasps echoed around the room. Jurors leaned forward, reporters froze mid-shot, and even the judge's pen hovered above the page, suspended in midair. Officer Daniels moved instinctively, trying to regain control. "Rex, sit," he barked, but the command was ignored. The dog's focus had shifted entirely, and it was as if nothing else in the room existed. His ears tilted forward, his eyes glimmering with recognition and something deeper, something that didn't belong in a courtroom. Daniel's face went pale. He knelt slightly to speak to the dog, voice trembling. "Rex, what's wrong?" But the dog remained with Avery, body pressed protectively against the child, a low whine vibrating from deep in his chest. Whispers swelled into murmurs, murmurs into audible confusion. The judge slammed his gavel again, though the sound seemed almost comical compared to the extraordinary scene unfolding in front of him. "Order, I said order." His voice carried, but the courtroom collectively ignored him. Lawyers exchanged bewildered glances. Journalists raised their cameras, capturing footage of the incredible interaction. It wasn't just unusual, it was extraordinary, almost miraculous. Avery's mother, Emily Carter, finally spoke, her voice quivering. It's okay, baby, go to him." Her words seemed unnecessary. Avery had already made her choice. She knelt in front of Rex, small hands brushing through his thick fur, whispering softly, "It's you, it's really you." The courtroom's silence was deafening. The dog's usual stoicism had vanished, replaced by a vulnerability no one thought possible in a trained police animal. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing briefly, as if savoring a reunion he didn't know he'd been missing. Officer Daniels stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. He knew every dog in the department, every history file, every behavior pattern, but this was beyond training, beyond logic. He took a step closer, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness what was happening. "Rex, sit. Stay. Now," he commanded again, voice rising with urgency, but the dog only pressed closer to Avery, tail thumping gently on the polished floor. The spectators and jurors leaned forward, the tension almost unbearable. Tears brimmed in the eyes of several onlookers, and a few mothers whispered to their children, "See that? See how he knows her." Avery, oblivious to the attention, spoke softly to the dog again. Her voice was small but confident, filled with a sense of intimacy only they understood. "I missed you." The words were innocent, almost naive, but the impact was seismic. Rex's eyes glistened, and a low, almost human sigh escaped his muzzle. The judge finally rose, struggling to maintain composure. This is highly irregular," he stammered. "All parties please remain calm." But no one was calm. The courtroom had transformed from a space of legal authority into something almost sacred, charged with emotions too powerful to ignore. The scene was surreal. A tiny child, a massive police dog, and a silent story of recognition and reunion that no one else could yet understand. Emily Carter knelt beside her daughter, brushing stray curls from Avery's forehead. "Go ahead," she whispered. Avery turned to her mother briefly, then back to the dog, her tiny hand still resting on his shoulder. She spoke again, two simple words, "It's Max." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Max, the family dog who had disappeared 2 years ago in a violent storm, reported lost, presumed gone forever. And now he was here, sitting in a courtroom, responding to a toddler as though no time had passed at all. Officer Daniels' jaw dropped. Memories of that day flashed through his mind. The stray dog he'd picked up, trained and certified as Rex, the countless hours of obedience training, rescue simulations, and deployments. He had never seen a dog respond this way. The bond Avery had with Max, Rex, was beyond explanation, defying every principle of canine behavior he had studied. The courtroom held its collective breath, waiting for the next move, the next word, the next sign of recognition or chaos. Avery took another step forward, tiny fingers stroking the dog's thick fur. "You're home now," she whispered. The dog leaned into her, pressing his enormous head against her chest, almost as if confirming her words. Every person in the room felt it, the unspoken recognition, the undeniable connection between child and dog. Gasps, muffled sobs, and whispers echoed through the courtroom as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. And in that frozen moment, every individual judge, juror, reporter, officer understood one thing: this was no ordinary day in court. Something extraordinary had just begun. Avery's 2 words, "It's Max," hung in the air like a lightning strike. The courtroom seemed to vibrate, each heartbeat echoing in silence. Reporters froze mid-note, cameras aimed but unblinking. Jurors exchanged confused, almost fearful glances. Officer Daniels staggered backward, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing as if trying to catch up with reality. This dog, Rex, was supposed to be a well-trained, emotionless canine. And yet, here he was, trembling, whimpering, tail low, nudging toward a child he had never been trained to know. The judge's gavel banged again, but it was a weak attempt to restore order. "All right, enough," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual authority. He adjusted his glasses, leaning forward, trying to process the impossible. "Explain this," he demanded, looking between Daniels, Avery, and her mother. "Explain why a police dog, trained, certified, and deployed, would act like this toward a toddler in my courtroom." Daniels took a cautious step forward, one hand instinctively resting on Rex's collar. "Your Honor, I don't understand it myself," he said, voice tight with emotion. His training, instincts, and experience screamed at him to pull the dog away, but his heart betrayed him. Rex, Max, was not just a police asset anymore. He was something far more personal, something raw, something no protocol could explain. Emily Carter stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "Your Honor, this is our family dog," she said, voice quivering. She held Avery close, brushing her daughter's hair from her eyes. "His name is Max. He went missing 2 years ago during the storm. We never thought we'd see him again." The courtroom collectively inhaled, as if absorbing every word. There was disbelief, curiosity, and now a flicker of hope, all converging in one tense, fragile moment. Daniel's face paled. He knew exactly what she was saying. Max, that dog, his past, his present, and now a revelation that could upend not only the courtroom but the police K-9 program. The dog's reactions, the trembling, the whining, the way he pressed into Avery, weren't the result of training. They were memory recognition, a bond that defied time, circumstance, and logic. Avery, oblivious to the chaos swirling around her, knelt beside Rex, tiny fingers brushing through his fur. "It's you," she whispered again. The dog leaned into her touch, resting his massive head on her lap. Every muscle, every instinct in Rex's body screamed familiarity, comfort, and relief. Officer Daniels' hands shook as he tried to maintain control. "Rex, sit, he commanded, louder this time, desperation creeping into his voice. But the dog ignored him entirely. The jurors were on the edge of their seats, leaning forward as if proximity could make sense of what they were witnessing. Reporters whispered into microphones, their words lost in the collective astonishment. Even the judge, a man who had spent decades managing chaos and human folly, looked stunned, his gavel idle in front of him. He had presided over countless emotional testimonies, but he had never, ever seen anything like this. Emily gently lifted Avery to stand in front of Rex, her tiny hand still resting on his shoulder. "He's our dog," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "We thought we'd lost him forever, but it seems he remembered us." The courtroom fell silent again, every eye locked on the interaction. It was no longer just a dog. It was a story of survival, loyalty, and the invisible ties that bind humans and animals. Daniel's mind raced. The dog he had trained for obedience, rescues, and service was now revealing a history no one had known except the family. He swallowed hard, feeling a tight knot in his throat. This is impossible," he muttered, almost under his breath. Every protocol, every rule about K-9 service dogs, every logic he had relied on was unraveling in front of him. His voice quivered as he spoke to the judge. "Your Honor, I need to verify." "Verify?" the judge barked, though his tone lacked real authority now. "You need to do more than verify, officer. You need to explain why this dog is acting like he knows this child." His gavel tapped lightly, ineffective against the emotional storm now gripping the room. "We are not going to continue until this is clarified." Emily nodded toward the dog. "Max," she whispered softly, "do you remember me?" The dog's eyes met hers. The low whine grew louder, a sound full of emotion, almost human. Every movement spoke a language no one else could decipher. He pressed his head further into Avery's chest, tail wagging just slightly. He wasn't just reacting, he was communicating. Recognition, longing, relief, it was all there, a silent confession of the bond that had survived years of separation. Avery's small fingers moved across his ears and neck, and she whispered something Daniels couldn't hear. The dog tilted his head, ears perked, eyes glimmering. A faint, almost imperceptible gesture, a paw lifted, a spin, a tap on Avery's knee made Daniels stagger. That motion was a trick he had taught only one dog years ago, Max. No other dog could replicate it with such precision. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. This was not just coincidence. This was memory. This was connection. The judge's gavel finally fell again, but more as a nervous tick than a command. "Order," he repeated, voice tight. "Everyone remain in your seats while we figure this out." He scribbled notes furiously, muttering to himself. The room seemed suspended in time, caught between legal procedure and emotional revelation. The ordinary rhythm of a courtroom, testimony, objection, deliberation, was gone. It had been replaced by awe, wonder, and growing tension. Daniels took a cautious step closer, eyes trained on the dog. "Max, buddy, come here," he murmured. The dog didn't move. Instead, he pressed closer to Avery, ears forward, eyes filled with an understanding no one in the room could explain. The officer's hand twitched toward the leash, then froze. Logic screamed that he needed to assert authority, but instinct, something deeper, emotional, human, told him to stop. The dog was making a choice. "Why isn't he listening to you?" Emily asked softly, eyes wide with astonishment. She crouched to Avery's level, brushing her hair back. "Do you know him?" Avery nodded, eyes fixed on the dog. "He's mine," she whispered. The words, simple and innocent, were enough to send ripples through the courtroom. Reporters adjusted their cameras, scribes paused mid-sentence, and jurors gripped the arms of their chairs. Every eye was glued to the tiny girl and the massive dog that seemed to belong entirely to her. Daniels swallowed, voice hoarse. "Your Honor, I think this dog, he might be Max." Every syllable felt heavy. Every breath trembled. He had known Rex for years in the department, had trained him, relied on him, even trusted him with life and death situations. Yet the idea that Rex was, in fact, Max, the lost family dog, was undeniable. The low whine, the gestures, the recognition, all pieces of a puzzle that could no longer be ignored. The judge exhaled slowly, running a hand across his face. "If that is true," he murmured, "then we are no longer talking about procedure, property, or even law. We are talking about something else entirely." He glanced at Avery, whose tiny fingers still rested on Max's fur. "Something extraordinary," he added, voice soft, almost reverent. The courtroom leaned in collectively, everyone sensing the gravity of the moment, waiting for the next word, the next gesture, the next revelation. Avery whispered again, barely audible, "I missed you, Max." The dog nudged her gently with his massive head, tail flicking, eyes glimmering. A collective intake of breath swept the room. The impossible had become visible, undeniable, and deeply emotional. In that courtroom, with the sun streaming through the tall windows, a story of loss, love, and reconnection was playing out. A story no one could ignore, and no one would forget. Every person in the room knew, instinctively, that the next move would change everything. For the dog, for the child, for the family, and for everyone forced to witness this extraordinary reunion. The courtroom waited, suspended, caught between disbelief and hope, as the tiny girl, the massive dog, and the trembling officer stood at the center of a moment that would be told for decades. And in that silence, the unspoken question hung. What happens next? The courtroom hung in a fragile silence. Every person present could feel it, the slow, undeniable recognition between a tiny child and a massive dog, a bond that no law, no protocol, and no logic could explain. Officer Daniels' hands trembled as he knelt beside Rex Max. His chest tightened. He had trained dogs for years, relied on them in life-or-death scenarios, but nothing had prepared him for this. This was not training. This was memory. This was connection. This was family. Emily Carter crouched next to Avery, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Show them, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Avery's gaze never left the dog's. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted one of Rex's massive ears, revealing a thin, crescent-shaped scar hidden in the folds of fur. A scar Daniels had never seen in the police files. It was subtle, easily missed by anyone unfamiliar with Max, but for the Carters it was unmistakable. The courtroom gasped collectively. That matches his injury," Emily whispered, voice shaking. She turned toward the judge, who leaned forward, eyes wide. "2 years ago he was injured during a storm," she continued. "We reported him missing. We thought we'd never see him again." The jurors' jaws tightened. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicking. Even Daniel's voice caught in his throat. He had trained Rex for obedience, for rescue, for life-saving operations. But this bond, this recognition, this memory of a family was beyond the scope of his understanding. Avery, tiny hands still on Max's fur, whispered something only he could understand. A phrase her father had taught the dog years ago, a secret command hidden from everyone else. In response, the dog executed a perfect spin, a small hop, and a gentle tap on her knee, the exact behavior only Max had ever performed at home. Daniel staggered backward, a hand flying to his mouth. This was impossible. No trained dog could respond to a command it had never been taught. And yet here it was, unfolding in front of hundreds of witnesses. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The jurors leaned forward wide-eyed. Reporters adjusted lenses and microphones trying to capture the inexplicable display. That's him, Emily breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. That's Max. The judge rubbed his temples, exhaling heavily. This changes everything, he muttered. Lawyers muttered among themselves, flipping through files, trying to reconcile protocol with emotion, law with memory. But nothing in legal precedent could explain what was happening. Officer Daniels knelt, frozen. He had raised and trained this dog for over 3 years as Rex. He had written reports, completed certifications, even deployed him on missions. And yet the realization hit him like a sledgehammer. Rex was Max, the missing family dog. The dog reported lost in a storm. The dog that had disappeared from a small suburban backyard and was presumed gone forever. And now, here he was, responding to a toddler as though no time had passed. Emily stepped closer to Daniels, voice trembling but firm. "You see it, don't you?" she asked softly. "He remembers us. He knows us. That's Max. That's our dog." Daniels nodded, swallowing hard, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "Yes, I see it," he whispered. I didn't know. I didn't realize." Every word felt heavy with guilt and disbelief. He had loved Rex. He truly had. But this revelation made him realize how much he had been unknowingly standing in the way of a reunion years in the making. The judge cleared his throat, trying to restore some semblance of order. "We need clarity," he said. "This is no longer about procedure or law enforcement. We are witnessing something extraordinary, but facts matter, evidence matters, documentation matters." He paused, glancing at Daniels. "Officer, you claim this dog Rex may be Max, a family pet. Is that correct?" Daniels swallowed, voice unsteady. "Yes, Your Honor, I believe so." Everything, the recognition, the gestures, the scar, points to it. I can't explain it logically, but yes, he is Max." Gasps filled the room. Some jurors covered their mouths. Reporters whispered into microphones, their voices filled with excitement and disbelief. Avery leaned on the dog's shoulder, whispering softly, and Max nudged her hand in return, his massive head pressing into her small chest as though confirming her words. Emily, tears streaming, clasped her hands together. "We thought he was gone," she said. "Gone forever, but here he is, and he remembers us." Daniel's voice trembled as he continued. "He has been trained as a police dog. He has served for the city, completed operations, saved lives. But this connection, this bond, it transcends training. It is familial, emotional, real, and undeniable." The judge nodded slowly, scribbling notes furiously. "We may need to consider custody, emotional well-being, rehabilitation for both the child and the dog. But first, we need to understand the full story." Emily guided Avery to sit on the floor beside Max. The tiny girl stroked the dog's fur, whispering phrases only he would understand. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle movement of the massive dog's body confirmed what no one else could yet articulate. This was more than a trained animal. This was a family member, a protector, a companion. And he had remembered. He had waited. And now he had returned. Daniels crouched to speak quietly to Emily. "We need to document this," he said softly. "Medical records, service logs, training files, everything. We need to make sure there's no mistake." Emily nodded, gripping his hand briefly. "I understand, but right now can we just let her hug him?" Daniels hesitated, then slowly nodded, realizing some moments were bigger than procedure, bigger than rules, bigger than anything he had ever encountered. The judge called for a recess, ordering everyone to step back as the extraordinary situation unfolded. Lawyers whispered urgently, reporters repositioned cameras, and jurors remained fixed on the tiny girl and the massive dog who had defied every expectation. Even in the flurry of movement, the room remained charged with emotion, the kind of heavy, weighty tension that lingers long after a brief encounter. It was the kind of moment that would be talked about for decades. Avery continued to stroke Max's fur, murmuring softly. "You're home now," she whispered. Max responded with a gentle nuzzle, resting his enormous head on her lap. Officer Daniels knelt nearby, notebook in hand, but he was watching, not taking notes. He understood that some evidence didn't belong on paper, it belonged in the heart. Emily's tears glistened in the sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows. The jurors leaned forward, silent witnesses to a reunion that defied law, logic, and every expectation of reality. Then a lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the fragile calm. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady but edged with urgency. "We need to determine legal custody immediately. This dog is property of the department, trained and certified, but if the child claims he is her dog, there is a conflict." The judge exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. The room's tension rose again, now laced with uncertainty, curiosity, and an unspoken question: who truly had the right to Max? Max lifted his massive head, ears forward, eyes scanning the room. His gaze flicked from Avery to Officer Daniels and back again, a silent, unspoken message conveyed in every tilt of his head, every flick of his tail. He was aware of the conflict, the tension, the authority figures. But in this moment he made one thing clear: he recognized his family. And the room waited, collectively holding its breath, for the next word, the next gesture, the next revelation that would determine his future, and the future of the little girl who had just reclaimed him. Avery whispered softly, barely audible, "It's you." Max's ears pricked, his tail flicked, and he pressed his head once more into her lap. Every person in the courtroom felt it, as if the emotional energy radiated from the center of the room outward, impossible to ignore. The question lingered, electric and tense. What would happen next? Would the law take precedence, or would the bond between a child and her dog reshape everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and family? And in that moment, the impossible seemed inevitable. Max would choose. The court would watch. And no one would ever forget the day when a 3-year-old girl reunited with her dog in a courtroom, defying every rule, protocol, and expectation, and leaving every adult present questioning how love could transcend even the most rigid systems. The courtroom had settled into an uneasy quiet, but the tension was far from over. Max, once Rex, the police dog, now firmly recognized as the Carters' long-lost family dog, remained at the center of an emotional maelstrom. Avery's tiny hands rested gently on his massive shoulder as he pressed his head into her chest. Every muscle in his body seemed to communicate a story: years lost, fear endured, and a longing for reunion finally fulfilled. Yet, the courtroom didn't have the luxury to celebrate just yet. Legal questions loomed, and Daniels, despite his awe, was painfully aware of the rules he served. The judge leaned forward, voice measured but heavy with authority. "We must address the legal implications of this revelation," he said. "Officer Daniels, this dog has been certified as a member of the police K-9 unit. The department owns him. He has performed duty, saved lives, and undergone extensive training. Now we are told he may be a private family pet who disappeared years ago. That's extraordinary, but we cannot ignore the law." His gavel tapped lightly, but the sound felt hollow, lost beneath the emotional weight in the room. Daniels exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "Your Honor, I understand completely," he said, voice tight. "But this is not just a legal matter anymore. This dog, Max, responded to a 3-year-old child as if he remembered her, as if she were his family. I've trained him for years, but this bond, it's beyond my authority, beyond my comprehension." He gestured to Max, who lay partially across Avery's small lap, tail flicking lazily but eyes alert. "Look at him. He's communicating, recognizing, remembering. He knows them. He remembers home." The judge paused, steepling his fingers as he considered the situation. "Evidence is required," he murmured, though the words felt perfunctory. "Documentation, records, proof that this dog is indeed the same animal that belonged to the Carters. Until then, the department's claim remains valid. However, I am willing to allow testimony." He glanced at Emily Carter, who nodded and motioned toward her daughter. Avery whispered softly, stroking Max's head. The dog nudged her hand, and a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, a paw lift, confirmed the recognition. Emily began recounting the story, her voice trembling yet precise. "2 years ago, during a violent storm, Max went missing. We searched for months, posted flyers, contacted shelters, everything. We thought he had been lost forever. Weeks later, the department picked up a stray German shepherd, brought him in, trained him as a police dog. They named him Rex. We never imagined it could be Max, but now," her voice broke. She gestured toward her daughter. "Avery recognizes him. She's spoken phrases only Max would understand. She's elicited behaviors only he ever performed at home." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I've run every file, every record," he admitted. "Rex has been in service for 2 years. All documentation is accurate, but something happened. This dog, Max, is responding to the child in ways no trained dog could. He remembers her, he knows the family, that's undeniable." His voice shook. I can't explain it, but it's happening right here, right now." The judge rubbed his temples, visibly struggling to reconcile law with reality. "This is unprecedented," he admitted. "And yet this court cannot ignore the emotional well-being of the child or the dog." He tapped the gavel lightly. "I am willing to consider temporary custody arrangements while we investigate fully. Officer Daniels, you remain responsible for the dog's care as a police asset, but we need to observe his behavior with the child and her family. If the dog chooses the child, we will take that into account." Avery, oblivious to the legal maneuvering, whispered softly, "You remember me, Max, don't you?" Max pressed his head into her chest, tail flicking slowly, eyes soft and wide. It was as if he were answering her, confirming the reunion that had just begun. The tension in the courtroom shifted subtly, awe mingled with suspense. Every adult present realized they were witnessing a choice unfold in real time, one that would shape the lives of everyone involved. Daniels knelt beside the dog, hand hovering above the collar, unsure whether to intervene. He had never experienced anything like this, a trained, certified K9 dog defying authority in favor of instinct, memory, and connection. "Your Honor," he murmured, voice low, "he's making a choice, he's deciding." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A choice? What do you mean?" Daniels swallowed hard. "He's deciding who he belongs to, and right now it seems clear who that is." Emily's eyes glistened as she knelt beside her daughter. "We just want him home," she said softly. "We never gave up hope. We searched every shelter, every street, every park. We never stopped looking, and now he's here." Her hand rested gently on Max's head. The dog shifted slightly, leaning further into Avery, nudging her tiny hand with his massive muzzle. Every person in the room could see it, the unmistakable bond, the history, the love. The judge exhaled slowly. "We will need verification," he said, voice measured. "Veterinary records, training logs, scars, any identifiers, everything. But the emotional connection is clear. That cannot be denied." He looked toward Daniels. "I expect full cooperation, but I also expect the dog's welfare to be considered, and I am curious, if I may be candid, to see how he responds during interactions with the child. That will inform this court's decision." Daniels nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand. I just didn't expect it to happen like this." His eyes flicked to Max, lying beside Avery, the dog's massive frame seemingly calm yet vibrating with energy and recognition. He had seen obedience. He had seen courage. He had seen loyalty in action. But he had never seen this, pure, instinctive recognition, rooted in memory and love. Avery whispered again, voice soft but deliberate, "I missed you." Max pressed his head fully against her chest, tail flicking, ears relaxed but alert. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was a gesture of affirmation, acknowledgement, and reunion. The tiny child had elicited the ultimate response, and no adult or legal authority could undo it. The judge leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "We will take a recess," he announced. "Documentation will be reviewed, the dog's behavior observed, and the court will reconvene to determine custody and welfare arrangements. Everyone present will remain in the courtroom until further notice. And let me be clear, this is unprecedented. No one has ever experienced a case like this. His voice faltered slightly, betraying the awe even he felt. Emily crouched beside Avery, brushing her hair from the toddler's eyes. "Do you understand, sweetie?" she whispered. Avery nodded, eyes still locked on Max. "I want him home," she said softly. Max nudged her hand again, a subtle affirmation. Daniels knelt nearby, notebook forgotten, watching in disbelief. Every training manual he had read, every protocol he had enforced, every lesson he had taught his fellow officers, none of it could have prepared him for this moment. Outside, reporters whispered into microphones, the story already rippling across social media. Headlines would scream about a toddler, a missing dog, and a courtroom frozen in awe. But inside it was quiet, sacred even. The tiny girl and the massive dog had reclaimed something lost, something invisible yet undeniable. And in the silent understanding that passed between them, every adult realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. A reunion that defied rules, defied logic, and touched something deep within the human heart. And then, as the courtroom began to stir, as officers and lawyers whispered among themselves, a sudden movement from Max caught everyone's attention. He rose on his massive legs, shifting between Avery and Daniels, glancing from one to the other, and then he barked once. A single, sharp bark that was more than a command, more than a greeting. It was a statement, a choice. And in that bark, every person in the room understood. The next chapter of this story would be written not in law books, but in the bond between a child and her dog. Every eye followed Max. Every heartbeat quickened. Every adult in that courtroom waited, breath held, for the next move. Because whatever happened next would decide the future of Max, of Avery, and of every life touched by this miraculous reunion. The single bark echoed through the courtroom, startling some jurors and reporters alike. It was loud, sharp, and commanding, but unlike any command officer Daniels had ever given. Every head turned toward Max, who now stood fully upright, his massive body taut with energy, eyes locked on Avery. The tiny girl remained still, unafraid, hand resting gently on his broad chest. For a moment the courtroom seemed suspended in time. Every adult present understood instinctively that this was no ordinary dog responding to authority. It was a dog making a choice. Daniel swallowed hard, hand hovering over the leash. He had trained Rex for obedience, for action, for life-or-death scenarios. He had deployed with him, risked his own life alongside this dog, and taught him commands with precision. But this moment was different. Max was no longer a tool or a partner in duty. He was a being capable of memory, emotion, and decision. And in that instant, he was making his choice clear. Emily Carter stepped closer to her daughter, holding back tears. "Avery," she whispered softly, voice trembling, "it's okay, it's your dog, you can." She stopped mid-sentence as Max nudged Avery's hand and then with deliberate precision walked a few steps toward her, pressing his side against her small frame. The courtroom collectively exhaled. This was not obedience. This was reunion. This was instinct. This was love. Judge leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "We will need verification," he said carefully, voice tight with both authority and awe. "Veterinary records, training logs, and identification, everything. But the emotional bond is undeniable. That cannot be ignored." He glanced at Daniels, whose face was pale, lips pressed together. "Officer, you will cooperate fully, but we will observe this dog's behavior. That will inform the court's decision regarding custody and welfare. The dog's choice is paramount." Daniels nodded slowly, swallowing. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." His eyes flicked to Max, who now sat at Avery's feet, head tilted, eyes shimmering with recognition and trust. The officer had trained countless dogs, but none had ever displayed the level of awareness, memory, and emotion that Max was demonstrating. Every instinct he had as a K-9 handler screamed at him to assert authority, yet every ounce of his humanity told him to step back. Emily crouched beside Avery, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered. "You can hug him, talk to him, he remembers." Avery nodded, eyes wide but focused. "I missed you, Max," she whispered softly. Max responded immediately, nudging her hand with his massive muzzle, pressing his enormous head against her chest. The sheer intensity of the reunion caused murmurs to ripple through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras clicked, and jurors leaned forward, captivated. This was no ordinary courtroom drama. This was something that defied explanation, a story of memory, loyalty, and family reunion unfolding in real time. Lawyers whispered among themselves, trying to reconcile the legal obligations of the department with the undeniable emotional reality before them. Officer Daniels, kneeling nearby, could barely breathe, overcome by awe and a rising tide of guilt. For 2 years he had loved Rex. He had trained him, deployed him, relied on him. And yet in that moment he realized the dog's true heart had belonged elsewhere all along. "Your Honor," Daniels began hesitantly, voice tight, "he's making a choice. Not based on training, not based on obedience. He's choosing the child. He's choosing the family." The judge's brow furrowed. "And that choice," he said slowly, "is legally significant. We will consider it carefully." Avery leaned against Max, stroking his thick fur. "You're home now," she whispered. Max pressed his side closer to her, tail flicking slowly. The gesture was subtle but powerful, a confirmation that he had recognized her as family, that he remembered their time together, and that he had waited for this moment. The courtroom was silent, every person witnessing an extraordinary reunion that transcended law, procedure, and reason. Emily turned toward the judge, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your Honor, we never stopped looking for him. We searched every shelter, every neighborhood, every park. We thought he was lost forever, and now he's here and he remembers us." Her voice wavered. "We simply want him home with our family." The judge nodded slowly, scribbling notes. The legal challenge was enormous, but the emotional truth was undeniable. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "We have documentation," he said quietly. "Medical records, service logs, training records, everything. But the dog's behavior is undeniable. I cannot enforce authority over him when he has chosen. This is bigger than any rule, any procedure, any law. He's making a choice." The room held its breath. Every word hung heavy in the air, weighted with emotion and uncertainty. The judge cleared his throat. "We will need to review all records," he said, "and observe interactions between the child and the dog. Temporary custody arrangements may be necessary. The dog's welfare and the child's emotional well-being are paramount." He glanced at Daniels. "Officer, you will remain involved in the dog's life during this period. Your cooperation is essential." Daniels swallowed, nodding, though his mind was elsewhere, focused on Max, on Avery, on the impossible bond before him. Avery whispered again, soft but deliberate. "Remember me, Max." The dog's ears pricked, tail flicked, and he pressed his enormous head fully against her chest. It was a gesture of affirmation, a declaration of loyalty and recognition. The entire courtroom felt it, as if a wave of emotion had washed over them. Adults, accustomed to control and authority, were powerless in the face of this simple, profound bond between child and dog. The judge leaned forward, voice low but firm. "This is unprecedented. We will recess for verification and review. Documentation, records, and observations will be conducted. But mark my words, the dog's behavior and choice will carry weight. Emotional bonds, particularly in extraordinary cases like this, cannot be ignored." He tapped the gavel lightly, a mere punctuation to the suspended tension. "We reconvene in 1 hour. Everyone remain in place." As the courtroom began to stir, reporters murmuring, jurors whispering, and lawyers consulting notes, Max shifted again, standing upright between Avery and Daniels. His gaze flicked from one to the other, tail wagging slightly. Then he let out another single, sharp bark, clear, decisive. It was a sound that cut through the murmurs and whispers, demanding attention, commanding focus. It was more than a bark. It was a statement, a choice, a declaration. Daniels knelt, notebook forgotten, watching in disbelief. "He's deciding," he murmured, voice barely audible. The judge nodded, pen poised above paper. "Indeed," he said quietly. "And what he decides may very well rewrite the rules of law, procedure, and custody in this courtroom." Emily's tears glistened, brushing her daughter's hair aside. Avery looked at Max, her tiny hand resting on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can be home." The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Every adult present understood the gravity of the moment. Max, a dog trained for duty deployed for the city, had just reclaimed his true family. Every gesture, every movement, every subtle nudge of his head or lift of his paw carried weight far beyond the courtroom walls. The question remained: would the law recognize what was already emotionally, instinctively, undeniably true? And then Max did something unexpected. He stepped fully toward Avery, placing one massive paw gently over hers. The motion was deliberate, protective, and unequivocal. Every juror leaned forward. Every reporter adjusted their cameras. Every adult present understood. The choice had been made. But what did that mean for Officer Daniels, for the city, for the law? The room was suspended in a tension that was at once emotional and legal, uncertain yet full of hope. Avery's whisper was barely audible. "You remembered me." Max nudged her hand once more. Daniels swallowed hard, eyes glistening. The judge exhaled slowly, tapping the gavel once. "This is extraordinary," he said softly, "and it may take extraordinary measures to resolve, but one thing is clear: the bond between this child and this dog cannot be denied." The tension in the courtroom remained palpable. Every adult waited for the next move, every whisper, every gesture, every choice Max might make. The dog had already made his first declaration, and now the world held its breath for what would follow next. Would custody be granted? Would Max's life with the Carters begin officially, or would legal complications intervene? And in the center of it all, a 3-year-old girl continued to stroke her dog's fur, unaware of the storm she had set in motion, and utterly unafraid of the extraordinary truth before her. The courtroom was charged with a tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Max, once Rex, towered beside Avery, his massive frame both protective and gentle. Every eye in the room was fixed on the tiny girl and the dog who had defied expectation, training, and law to reunite. Officer Daniels knelt nearby, a storm of emotions playing across his face: pride, awe, guilt, and confusion. This dog had been his partner, his responsibility, his duty. And now, in one subtle gesture, Max had reclaimed a bond that Daniels could not command or enforce. Avery's small hand rested firmly on Max's shoulder, her fingers brushing the thick fur at the base of his neck. "You're home now," she whispered softly. Max pressed his massive head against her chest, his eyes shimmering with recognition and a calm that belied the chaos around them. Every movement communicated certainty. He had chosen, and that choice was deliberate. The courtroom seemed to collectively exhale, though the weight of legal uncertainty still hung over the room. The judge cleared his throat, glancing down at his notes and then back at the scene. "We need a plan," he said, voice careful but firm. "Temporary arrangements must be made to ensure both the child's safety and the dog's well-being. Officer Daniels, you will remain in charge of Rex, Max, until verification is complete, but we will allow supervised interaction with the family." Daniels nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Understood, Your Honor," he said, though his mind was a whirlwind of emotions and conflicting duties. Emily stepped closer to the small girl. "Sweetheart," she whispered, brushing Avery's hair from her forehead, "you can be with him, but we have to follow the rules first. We have to make sure everything is done properly." Avery nodded solemnly, her attention never leaving Max. The dog's eyes followed every movement of the child, attentive, protective, and patient. It was clear to every adult present that no one else mattered in that moment. Not the law, not the rules, not even the officers. It was just the girl and her dog. Daniels knelt beside Max, studying him carefully. Every fiber of his trained instincts screamed to assert control, but he hesitated. This was different. This was not a dog responding to commands or threats. This was a dog acting on memory, loyalty, and love. His hand hovered above the leash, unsure whether to touch it. Max's gaze flicked between him and Avery, then nudged the tiny girl with his head again, reaffirming his choice. Daniels exhaled slowly, realizing he could not force obedience over instinct. Not this time. The judge leaned forward, voice measured. "We will need documentation immediately. veterinary records, injury logs, K-9 training reports, and any identifying marks. This will determine not only temporary custody but the legitimacy of the family's claim. He paused, eyes scanning the room. I will also allow testimony from the officer who trained this dog to better understand the behavioral patterns and anomalies present. Daniel swallowed, nodding. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him more heavily than ever. Emily crouched to her daughter's level. "Do you understand, baby?" she whispered. Avery nodded, her hand still on Max's shoulder. "I want him home," she said softly. Max responded immediately, pressing closer to her side. The subtle touch, the shift of his massive body spoke volumes. The courtroom collectively held its breath. No words could capture what was happening, only observation could convey the truth. Every gesture was laden with significance, a language only the child and the dog fully understood. Outside the courtroom, whispers ran rampant. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured into microphones, social media notifications pinged relentlessly. Everyone wanted to capture this miracle, a 3-year-old reunited with her long-lost dog in front of a stunned courtroom. But inside, the energy was sacred, tense, and fragile. This was more than a story. It was a moment that defied understanding, a reunion that transcended logic and law. Daniels finally spoke, voice low and filled with emotion. "Your Honor, I must admit I've trained hundreds of dogs and none have ever demonstrated this level of memory, recognition, or loyalty. This is extraordinary. He's not responding to commands. He's responding to a child he hasn't seen in years. He's choosing her, and I cannot interfere." The judge nodded slowly. "That is a key observation, officer. Your testimony will be invaluable. But the court must also consider custody, property rights, and public interest." Emily shifted closer, brushing tears from her cheeks. "All we want," she said softly, "is for our family to be together, for our child and her dog to be reunited safely. We never imagined it would happen like this in a courtroom under legal scrutiny, but it has, and it's real." The judge's gaze softened, though his words remained precise. "Extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. Verification will be completed, but the child's emotional well-being is paramount. This court will prioritize that." Avery whispered again to Max, her voice barely audible. "You remembered me, right?" The dog pressed his head fully against her chest, tail flicking in slow, deliberate motion. The small gesture was full of communication, reassurance, and affirmation. The courtroom was silent, every adult caught between awe and disbelief. This was no ordinary bond, no simple recognition. It was instinct, memory, and love manifest in real time. Then a clerk entered with a folder of records, handing them to the judge. Veterinary reports, injury logs, training certifications. They all bore details that confirmed what the Carters had said. Max had indeed been their family dog, missing for over 2 years, and he had been reported lost during a storm. The scars, the unique gestures, the behavioral quirks, they all matched perfectly. Every adult in the room felt the gravity of the revelation, but no one could anticipate the emotional storm about to unfold. Daniels reviewed the documents silently, his hands trembling slightly. Everything confirmed the impossible. Max was Max, the long-lost family dog, the child's loyal companion. And yet he had served as a police K-9 for 2 years, performing duties, following commands, and earning recognition. The dual identity was almost surreal, a living testament to resilience, loyalty, and emotional intelligence. Every instinct in Daniel's body screamed awe and humility. The judge looked down at the paperwork, then back at the scene before him. Max, the massive dog, pressed against Avery, attentive, calm, yet alert. Avery, tiny, vulnerable, but resolute, stroking his fur, whispering words only he could understand. Emily stood nearby, holding back tears, watching her daughter reclaim what was lost. Daniels knelt silently, a mix of pride and resignation on his face. The courtroom was a stage for a story that defied precedent, yet unfolded with undeniable truth. Finally, the judge spoke, voice low but firm. Based on the evidence, the records, and most importantly, the observed behavior and emotional bond, This court acknowledges that extraordinary circumstances exist. The dog has demonstrated a clear preference, an unambiguous choice, and a deep emotional connection with the child. We will proceed with temporary custody arrangements to allow supervised interaction between the child and the dog while verification is completed. A collective sigh passed through the courtroom. For the first time in hours, there was a sense of relief, tempered by lingering uncertainty. Max nudged Avery again and she giggled softly. The small sound, pure and innocent, seemed to soften even the judge's stern expression. Daniels exhaled, realizing that for the first time in years, he had witnessed something beyond training, beyond protocol, something profoundly human. As the courtroom prepared to recess, Max shifted slightly, moving between Avery and Daniels, glancing at each adult present. His gaze was calm but deliberate, full of intelligence and emotion. He had made a choice, and that choice had shifted the balance in the room. Every person present understood that the next steps would not be simple. Custody, legal responsibility, public scrutiny, all of it loomed. Yet for now, the child and her dog were reunited, and the bond between them radiated a quiet, undeniable truth. Love, memory, and loyalty could transcend even the most rigid structures. And just as everyone began to stir, the judge paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "One more thing," he said, voice low. "We must consider the implications beyond this courtroom. A police dog cannot simply disappear from service without explanation. This will involve the department, the public, and potentially the media. The choices made here will have consequences far beyond these walls." The room fell silent again, tension spiking. Every adult present realized that this story was far from over. The reunion had been miraculous, yes, but the decisions to come would test legality, loyalty, and morality in ways no one had anticipated. Max had made his first choice. Now the world would have to respond. And in that silence, Avery whispered softly, hand still on Max's shoulder. "We'll be together forever, right?" Max nudged her hand once more, eyes gleaming. Every heart in the courtroom understood that the answer, silent, profound, and absolute, was already clear. The courtroom had quieted, but the tension was far from gone. Max, the massive dog who had served as Rex in the police K-9 unit, now rested his enormous head on Avery's lap. Every movement of his body radiated recognition, loyalty, and calm assurance. But the adults around him knew that what had unfolded was just the beginning. Officer Daniels watched silently, notebook abandoned, every muscle in his body taut with conflicting emotions. He had trained this dog for years, but now he realized that no training manual could account for memory, instinct, or love. Emily crouched beside Avery, brushing back a curl of her daughter's hair. "Sweetie, we need to stay calm," she whispered softly. "We're not done yet, but you're doing so well." Avery nodded, small hand stroking Max's thick fur, her eyes wide but confident. "He remembers me, Mommy," she said softly, voice trembling with awe. Max pressed his head further into her lap, tail flicking slowly, a gesture that was simple yet communicated volumes. Every adult in the courtroom felt the weight of it. The dog had chosen. The judge leaned forward, voice measured but heavy with authority. "Officer Daniels, I must understand fully. You trained this dog for 2 years. What are your observations regarding his behavior today? Could this recognition and bond with the child have occurred naturally, or is it something beyond training?" Daniels swallowed, voice tight. "Your Honor, I've trained hundreds of dogs in my career. None have demonstrated this level of memory or emotional connection. He's responding to the child in ways no protocol or command could elicit. This isn't obedience. It's recognition, instinct, and choice. He knows them, he remembers them, and he is making his choice clear." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Jurors leaned forward, reporters scribbled frantically. Emily swallowed hard, brushing tears from her cheeks. "We never stopped hopping," she said softly. "We thought he was lost forever, but now he's here and he's chosen." Max nudged Avery's hand, tail flicking once, a subtle but deliberate confirmation. The energy in the room was palpable, almost electric. Every adult understood this was more than a reunion. This was extraordinary, something that transcended the ordinary laws, rules, and expectations of the courtroom. Daniels shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the leash in his hands. Normally, he would issue commands, assert authority, guide behavior. But here he felt powerless, not in fear but in reverence. Max was not responding to training or coercion. He was acting on memory, loyalty, and choice. "Your Honor," Daniels continued quietly, "he has already made his decision. Every gesture, every movement, every nudge confirms it. The child is his family. That is undeniable." The judge nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. "This court will need verification," he said, voice heavy with deliberation. "Records, veterinary notes, injury logs, everything. But the observed behavior cannot be ignored. We will conduct supervised interactions and make temporary custody arrangements while verification is completed." Emily exhaled, relief washing over her, but the tension remained. Legal procedure and emotional reality were colliding, and no one could predict the outcome. Outside the courtroom, whispers ran rampant. Cameras clicked. Microphones captured every sound. Social media buzzed with the story of a toddler and her missing dog reunited in a courtroom. But inside, the air was still thick with uncertainty. This was not just a news story. It was a moment of human and animal connection, so profound that even trained officers and legal experts were powerless to contain its impact. Max, in the center of it all, remained calm, alert, and attentive, as if aware of the weight of the eyes on him and the decision being made on his behalf. The judge cleared his throat. "Temporary custody will be granted to the family under supervision," he said firmly. "Officer Daniels, you will remain present during these interactions to ensure the dog's safety and adherence to necessary training protocols. Any actions taken beyond supervision will require court approval. Do you understand?" Daniels nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, though his gaze remained locked on Max. Emily stepped closer to Avery, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You can spend time with him, sweetie," she whispered. Avery's eyes lit up. "Really?" she asked, voice trembling with excitement. Max responded immediately, nudging her hand and pressing his massive head against her chest. The room collectively held its breath, witnessing a bond that was deeper, more intricate, and more powerful than any law could define. Daniels finally spoke, voice low and contemplative. "Your Honor, this is extraordinary. I've trained countless dogs, deployed them in dangerous operations, and observed loyalty and intelligence at the highest levels. But this is beyond anything I've ever seen. His recognition of the child, the gestures, the memory, it's proof that some bonds are unbreakable, even across years, distance, and circumstance." The judge exhaled, scribbling notes carefully. "We will need to formalize temporary arrangements, including observation logs, supervised interaction reports, and emotional assessments. But let me be clear, the dog's preference is a central factor. Extraordinary cases like this require extraordinary consideration." He glanced at Emily, then Daniels. "Your cooperation will be essential. The child's well-being, the dog's welfare, and the legal implications must all be considered. Any deviation from protocol without supervision will have consequences." Avery whispered softly to Max, her tiny hand brushing his fur. "It's okay, Max. We're together now." Max responded immediately, nudging her hand and leaning closer. The simple gesture, small but profound, left the entire courtroom silent. Every adult, juror, and officer understood that the dog had made his choice, and nothing else in the world mattered to him but the child. Emily turned to Daniels, voice soft but firm. "We're not trying to take him away from you," she said. "We just want him to be safe and happy and with his family." Daniels swallowed hard. "I know," he said quietly. "And seeing him like this with her, I understand. I never realized how deep this bond ran until now. I won't interfere. I just need to make sure he's protected and properly cared for." The judge called for a recess. "We will reconvene after documentation is reviewed," he said. "Temporary custody, supervised visits, and emotional assessments will proceed immediately. All parties remain in place. This courtroom will be closed to media during the observation period to protect the child and the dog." Reporters whispered urgently. cameras clicking as they prepared to capture the extraordinary story unfolding outside. As the courtroom began to empty, Max rose on massive legs, shifting slightly to rest his head against Avery's shoulder. Every motion was deliberate, communicative, and unmistakable. He had made his choice. He had reclaimed the bond that had been lost for years. And yet, the tension remained. Legal, departmental, and public ramifications still loomed, leaving every adult present uncertain of what would happen next. Daniels knelt beside him, hand hovering above the collar. "I'll follow your lead, Max," he whispered. "Whatever you choose, I'll respect it." The dog's ears pricked, tail flicked, and he pressed his side gently against Avery once more, a gesture that communicated trust, reassurance, and a quiet understanding that everything would be okay. Emily hugged Avery tightly, tears streaming down her face. "We'll figure it out, baby," she whispered. "We'll bring him home. We'll be together." Avery's small hands rested on Max, fingers brushing the thick fur, and the dog leaned into her, protective and calm. The scene was one of quiet triumph, yet heavy with suspense. The world outside the courtroom would soon have to reckon with the reality of this extraordinary reunion. And then, as the courtroom prepared to recess, a sudden movement caught everyone's attention. Max lifted his massive head, ears forward, and barked, not sharply but deliberately, as if signaling something urgent. Every adult froze. The bark carried weight, intention, and clarity. The tiny girl looked up, eyes wide. Officer Daniels exhaled slowly, tension snapping taut in his chest. The courtroom realized, collectively, that this was not just a gesture of choice. It was a warning, a signal, a prelude to something no one had yet anticipated. All eyes turned toward Max, waiting for the next move. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in unison, every adult in the room aware that the next moment would decide not only temporary custody, but the unfolding of a story that would be told for years. Max had chosen, yes, but now he had something urgent to communicate, something that could change everything once again. The room held its collective breath. The courtroom held its collective breath. Max, the massive dog who had defied law, training, and 2 years of police service, now lifted his head and barked again, this time sharper, more insistent. Every eye turned toward him. Avery's tiny hands froze on his fur. Officer Daniels instinctively tensed, muscles coiled like springs, unsure whether the bark was a warning, an alert, or an urgent demand for attention. For a moment, silence reigned, heavy and charged, as if time itself had paused to witness what would happen next. Emily knelt beside Avery, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, it's okay." "What is it, Max?" The dog's ears pricked, his gaze scanning the room. Then he bolted, not aggressively, not recklessly, but with purpose, moving toward the courtroom door. Daniels leapt to his feet, heart hammering. "Max, wait," he shouted, voice firm but careful. The dog paused, glancing back at Avery, tail flicking once in acknowledgement before continuing toward the exit. Every adult in the room froze, realizing the magnitude of the moment. This was no ordinary dog's action. The judge pounded the gavel lightly. "Stop him," he ordered, voice trembling, but no one moved fast enough. Max had already reached the door, nudged it open with his massive snout, and disappeared into the hallway. The sound of his paws echoed off the marble floors, deliberate and urgent. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Emily gasped, eyes wide. "Avery, he's trying to tell us something," she whispered, heart racing. Avery looked up at Max, confusion and determination mingling in her young eyes. "Go," she shouted softly. "Go find them." The dog's ears twitched and he bolted again, moving faster now. Daniels didn't hesitate. He sprinted after him, calling his name, voice echoing in the hallway. Every step brought him closer, but Max was relentless, leading the group through corridors, past security, past offices, in a straight line that only he seemed to know. Every adult's pulse quickened. Something urgent was happening, something no one anticipated. The trail led them to a side entrance, rarely used, where a small group of maintenance workers had gathered for a break. Max skidded to a stop in front of them, tail stiff, ears forward, alert. Daniel slowed, heart pounding. Emily and Avery followed, breathless, unsure what they would find. And then emerging from a nearby doorway was a man holding a frightened child, a small boy, no more than 4, crying softly, lost, confused. Max barked sharply again, circling the boy protectively, nudging him gently toward Avery. Avery's eyes widened. "Max, he's like me," she whispered, realization dawning. The boy clutched Max's fur, sobbing, and the dog pressed his side against him, a shield and reassurance in one. Emily rushed forward, taking the boy into her arms, whispering soothing words. Daniels knelt beside Max, astonishment on his face. The dog had not only reunited with Avery, but had instinctively located another child in distress. Years of training, instincts, and love combined in a single, decisive act of heroism. The judge arrived moments later, having followed the commotion, and stopped in the doorway. "Explain this," he demanded, voice a mix of incredulity and authority. Daniel straightened, catching his breath. "Your Honor, I trained him for obedience, search, and rescue. But this was beyond anything I've ever seen. He sensed danger, located the lost child, and guided them to safety. There's no protocol for this. This is pure instinct, memory, and loyalty." Emily knelt, cradling the boy. He just knew we needed him," she said softly. The courtroom erupted with murmurs, disbelief, and awe. Every officer, juror, and reporter present realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Max, the dog who had been declared missing and served as a police K-9, had just executed a real-time rescue and reunion that no human could have orchestrated. The tiny girl had spoken 2 words years ago. Now the dog had not only chosen her but demonstrated heroism that transcended the boundaries of law and logic. Daniels exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment of relief. "Your Honor, I think it's clear that Max belongs with the family," he said quietly, emotion catching in his throat. "Not just because of duty, but because of instinct, loyalty, and the extraordinary bond he shares with these children." The judge nodded slowly, scribbling notes. "Indeed," he said, voice measured. "The evidence is irrefutable. Temporary custody will be made permanent, and the police department will work with the family to ensure Max can serve both as a K-9 if needed and as a member of this household. Extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary flexibility." Emily wept openly, cradling Avery and the rescued boy. Avery wrapped tiny arms around Max, giggling softly, burying her face in his fur. "You saved him, Max," she whispered. The dog's tail wagged gently, nudging the boy with his nose as if to say, "It's okay, you're safe now." Daniels knelt, quietly stroking the dog's massive head, a profound mix of pride and reverence washing over him. He had trained countless dogs, faced life-or-death missions, and yet none of it compared to the quiet, powerful heroism he had just witnessed. The judge cleared his throat. "This courtroom will record today as a historic example of instinct, loyalty, and human-animal bonds," he said. "Max's actions have not only reunited a family but saved a life. This is a testament to the profound intelligence and emotional capacity of animals. Let it be noted that in extraordinary circumstances, laws and protocols can bend to protect life, family, and welfare." Emily hugged both children tightly, her tears mingling with laughter. "We have our family back," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. Avery beamed, hands still stroking Max's thick fur. The boy, still sobbing softly, leaned into Max's side, and the dog remained calm, alert, and protective. Every adult present understood that what had unfolded was more than a courtroom drama. It was a living miracle, a story that would ripple across communities, social media, and hearts everywhere. Daniels finally stood, eyes glistening. "I'll make sure the department updates records, ensures proper care, and gives him the respect he deserves," he said quietly. "But I also know that this dog, this incredible, loyal, heroic dog, has chosen his family, and I won't stand in the way of that choice." Max nudged Daniels gently, as if acknowledging the officer's respect and agreement. The gesture was subtle but meaningful. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed to capture the story. The toddler, the missing dog, the heroic rescue, and the extraordinary reunion. Social media buzzed, hashtags trended, and the tale went viral within minutes. But inside, the Carters sat together, 2 children and 1 dog, a family reunited in a way no law or system could fully explain. It was raw, emotional, and perfect in its imperfection. Avery whispered softly to Max, her voice barely audible. "We're together now forever." Max rested his massive head on her lap, tail flicking slowly, eyes soft but vigilant. He had chosen, he had acted, and he had saved a life. His job as a police dog was important, but this, the love, the memory, the bond, was unparalleled. The courtroom had witnessed a miracle, but the true story lived in the quiet, unspoken understanding between a child and her dog. The judge gave a final nod, voice steady but emotional. "Let it be recorded," he said. "Extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary courage, extraordinary love. Today, the law has been secondary to humanity, compassion, and instinct. Let this be a precedent for the profound power of bonds between humans and animals." Every adult present understood the weight of his words. What had begun as a legal dispute had ended in something far greater, a testament to love, loyalty, and choice. Daniel stepped aside, letting Emily gather her children and Max. The dog walked calmly beside the family, protective and serene. Jurors, officers, and staff watched in awe, understanding that they had been witnesses to a story that would be told for generations, a story of hope, reunion, and the inexplicable, unbreakable bond between a child and her dog. Avery looked up at Max one last time before leaving the courtroom. "You're my hero," she whispered. Max wagged his tail slowly, resting his massive head gently against her shoulder. Outside, sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, highlighting a family reunited, a hero celebrated, and a bond that law, time, and circumstance could never sever. And as the family stepped through the doors, journalists scrambling to capture every detail, Officer Daniels remained behind for a moment, watching Max disappear with his family. He exhaled slowly, heart full of awe. He had trained the dog, deployed him in life-or-death situations, and yet today, Max had taught everyone in the room the greatest lesson. Loyalty, love, and instinct could overcome any obstacle, even the boundaries of law itself. The story, once headlines, tweets, and viral videos, had always belonged to Max, the dog who remembered, who chose, and who saved, not just a family but everyone present by reminding them of the power of love. And in that final moment, Avery whispered 2 words into his fur. "Thank you, Max." The dog's tail wagged gently, eyes soft, as if to say simply, "I've always been here." The courtroom was silent. Hearts were full. And the world outside would never forget the day a 3-year-old girl and her dog rewrote the rules of law, loyalty, and love.